What's up, guys? It's KB. Make sure you subscribe to the Underground Sports Philadelphia YouTube channel. Click the bell icon down below so you don't miss a single video from us. And thanks for tuning in to another video from Underground Sports Philadelphia. Now let's get into it.
Philadelphia, baby, you're gonna love it. Best sports fans in the world. Actually, the worst, but that's what makes them the best.
Welcome back to Top Bins, the show, bringing you all the action from the Premier League and Serie A, England and Italy. I'm your host, Matt, not joined by my co-host, Dom. He is on beach duty this week away at the shore, so it's just me soothing your voice. Well, I'm giving you my soothing voice. Pretend that made better sense. Just wrapping up the weekend's action in England and Italy for you. It was Serie A's first weekend. Still wanted to hop on, at least give you some thoughts, something to chew on, as we'll be back next week to bring you all of the action from England and Italy, as we always do. So just three takeaways from each league, just to hold you over this week, so you have something to listen to on your car ride, or whatever it is. We'll start with the Premier League because we've got a little more games to work with, 2 game weeks now of narratives and data, things like that. Going to start with Brentford. Ivan Toney, of course, on suspension from a betting incident, or I should say betting incidents, like over 200 incidents. No problem, apparently. They last season, when he started to serve this ban, and when he dealt with injury a few times last year, 13 out of 15 points last season without him. Johan Visa and Brian Mbeumo have really stepped up nicely for Brentford in the meantime. Mbeumo's got 3 goals so far this year, 2 for Visa. I think that's a great start. You look at what Brentford do. I think they're one of the smartest and well-run clubs, I think, in England. Just buy very smartly, are fine with developing players, are fine with maybe getting cast-offs or guys from lower leagues and working what they in. This is a team that really lives and dies by the advanced stats a lot. They're an early adopter of a lot of those statistics that I think are more commonly used in the game now. So they've always been interested in finding that edge, and I think they found that. And I think it's really impressive. There's not a lot of teams, I think, at Brentford's level, and I mean mid-table, that could lose a striker, a main talismanic striker like Ivan Toney, and not suffer for it. And I think that's a really huge thing to look at. And you look at who they were playing too in Fulham. A team that has lost Mitrovic, one of their key players, and of course their key striker over the last 5-6 years. He's gone, and I think there's a lot of question marks about how they're going to replace him. They bought in Raul Jimenez, but he's obviously not been at that, even a good Premier League striker level in a few years. Really hasn't been to the, at that same spot. And part of that is injury related, right? He had a very bad head injury, but has really not recaptured that form recently. And I think they're going to struggle without him. So I think you have a great comparison there between 2 London-based clubs, even about how, losing that striker and still finding ways to create goals, create opportunities. Brentford aren't perfect, of course, but I think, through 2 game weeks, I think they're going to be okay, at least till Toney gets back. If he ends up back at Brentford, there's obviously going to be tons of rumors about him, as there kind of always is going to other English clubs. But, they'll be able to stay afloat, and I think will be okay this season, even though they're going to be missing Ivan Toney until January, which is a big takeaway from me for this weekend. Speaking of missing on your talismanic striker, Tottenham Hotspur sink Manchester United 2-0. It was not a perfect game, but in this second game post Harry Kane life, first home game without him, tons of trash on the field. I don't know what was up with that. Ended up a ton of paper airplanes, ton of balled up paper balls getting thrown on the field, which is a very interesting sight to see for sure. But I thought Spurs were not at their best in this game, and I think this is what Spurs are going to be this season, in that they definitely are going to be exploited at times with the space that they give up. And I do think, they like to play this inverted wing-back kind of style. Udogie, popping in a lot. You've even seen it with Emerson Royale. And, I think it's a really dangerous way to live your life, trusting fullbacks to kind of handle so much of the passing and build-up work in the center midfield. You've even seen with Liverpool, Alexander-Arnold, one of the, I think, better passers in all of the league, especially for a fullback, struggle with that at times. He got dispossessed by Bournemouth this weekend, led to their first goal. it's a lot to ask, and I do think Manchester United did exploit that at times in this game. But that's what Ange is going to bring. He's going to bring this kind of possession based. He's going to be willing to play a little bit high risk, and it paid off for them this week. And I think it's a great momentum win. And I think could put them in a really good spot. Going forward, I think Postecoglou is a good manager, and I felt that coming into the season. That's why I picked them. I think a lot of people were expecting Spurs to finish like ninth. Maybe even lower than that. But I do think they still have a lot of talent on that team, and they still have time to reinvest in that squad. Mickey Van de Ven still looks great to me. I think he's a center back that I really would love to have on my team, and I've really enjoyed watching him through 2 weeks. And I think the only negative comes away from that weekend. James Maddison has picked up an injury. Doesn't seem too serious. He's got some kind of MCL knee sprain. It seems like he could be back, not for this weekend's games, but next weekend, which is great news. James Maddison has been a player that has kind of struggled with fitness over the last few seasons. He has a habit of missing, anywhere from like 7 to 10 games in a Premier League campaign, which is not ideal, for a player of his talent to miss any time, because he just makes all the difference in the world. And you definitely saw that in that game. She's just so great at driving forward and taking on players and being that main creative force. On the opposite side here, Manchester United, disappointing start to the season. I thought they obviously were not great against Wolves. A little lucky to not have a penalty at the end of the game. That could have been a draw. They could be sitting on a point after 2 games. Sitting on 3 points after 2 is not an ideal start for them. I don't think it's where they necessarily envision themselves. I think they really would have been penciling in, at least 4 points here. You get a draw away at Spurs is not a terrible result. Mason Mount also walks away from this game injured. Doesn't seem anything long-term, but could miss the next 2 games. He's been a strange fit. I called him over the summer a complimentary piece. He's not the type of guy that's going to take over in midfield. I think he kind of has to be in the right situation. And I was really curious to see how this midfield is going to work. I have to say through 2 game weeks, I've not loved it. I don't think United fans have loved it. It just seems like a slightly awkward fit. It just feels like things aren't firing for them. I think the frustrating thing for Manchester United is they had 2 really good chances in this game. Bruno Fernandes especially misses a wide open header that I think if he converts, this game is honestly very different. So I think for me, I'm not hitting alarm bells for Manchester United, but it's not a very good start for a team that really needs it. I will say one thing that does concern me, again, not hitting alarm bells just yet, but teams have had a real ability to just run down the center of their defense so far this season, and that's something that's got to be corrected, because it's a very basic way of defending and a very basic thing to defend. And we saw it especially in that Wolves game on counterattacks. I can't tell you how many times there was 3v2 counters, and that's something that better teams will punish you for. Spurs didn't necessarily do that to them in this game in terms of the goals that they scored, but you do that over the course of the season. It's going to lead to some tough moments. And, I think they're going to have to navigate a tough spell here. Obviously, too, once they get Rasmus Højlund back, they're clearly really dependent on him, or at least hoping to have him in the squad. He's still dealing with this back injury. Not totally clear on when he'll be returning, but, they're going to hope that bringing in like a more solidified number 9 might clear things up. And on off-the-field stuff, Mason Greenwood is apparently not going to be reinstated to the Manchester United team. They're going to be working with him to find some other solution to his career where he plays. So that's something to keep an eye on. I think Adam Crafton at The Athletic deserves a lot of credit for the great reporting he did on that situation. I do think without that reporting, which led to, I think, increased public pressure, Mason Greenwood is probably playing in the Premier League next weekend. And I don't think that would have been right. So great work there on their end. And we'll see, how that situation develops, because it's still, I think, a case of a lot of intrigue for a lot of people, as it should be. Speaking of intrigue, speaking of, man, just an all-timer. West Ham sink Chelsea 3-1. Chelsea, talk about a really rough start to the season. 1 point after 2. You have Liverpool at home, West Ham away. Those are not the greatest fixtures to start out a season, and a new regime. Things brighten up for them quite a bit over the next few weeks, and I think we'll get maybe a better picture of where they actually are. I didn't think they were terrible in this game, if I'm being totally honest. I think the scoreline actually deceives a little bit. I think Chelsea were in control. I think Raheem Sterling is one of the best games I've seen him play for Chelsea. Really creative down the wing, beating his man constantly, and I just thought, just couldn't find a man in the box, or they couldn't find the finish, which I think is frustrating for Chelsea supporters, because they have spent so much money and they just still, it feels like they're like 3-4 players away. I don't know how it is, but they've spent $1 billion and it doesn't feel like a complete team yet. Now it's a young team. There's young players that I think you can hope develop. And obviously, you have a new manager. It's going to be a project. It's going to be a process. I don't think anyone is expecting anything different. But, man, it is not the lift-off you wanted, and especially not for Moises Caicedo coming on for his debut. Really disastrous debut, if I'm being honest. And, it's not going to help. He's already, the most expensive player in British history. You add what was a really bad debut in terms of giving the ball away, unnecessary fouls, gives away a penalty, which ultimately, secures the game for West Ham. That was their third goal late in stoppage time. It's tough. It's tough to see him go through that. He obviously hasn't had too much of a preseason because there was a whole issue, of course, with Bright not wanting him to leave, wasn't training with the squad as much. So I'm sure that plays a role. Don't want to judge a guy too much based off of 25 minutes of a debut here. That's certainly not going to necessarily be his Chelsea career, but again, when you have the pressure of being the most expensive player in British history, and you've kind of been built up, and you really have only had one very good season of Premier League football, maybe you start to get a little worried about what that pressure could do to a person. But, we'll see how that develops. Speaking of players not dealing with the pressure, Mykhailo Mudryk, just terrible performance yet again. I don't know what has happened to that guy. Always a little bit more of a raw prospect coming out of Ukraine, and I got to tell you, I've not been impressed with him at any point that I've seen him play in a Chelsea shirt. Just a shocking thing, and that is the danger with what Chelsea have been doing, which we highlighted when we were talking about Caicedo deal last week. Listen, it's fine to take risk on young players. I think you have to do that at some point across all sports. You got to be willing to bet on young guys and hope they can develop and put people in positions to succeed. What Chelsea are doing is really unprecedented, and I think could really come back to bite them. I can remember when they signed Kepa Arrizabalaga, and that was a 7-year contract. And after 2 years, that was one of the worst contracts in the league. He was stuck there. He had another 5 years. That's an insane amount of time. You're not talking about 8 or 9 year contracts for a lot of these players. Even if half of these players work out, that is a lot of players that are stuck on big wages, that are, again, will have 5-6 years on a deal and will probably want to move, will probably want to be loaned out. It's a huge drain. Chelsea have had these problems in the past too. Yeah, I got to tell you, like the Mudryk situation especially is the real highlight for me, in that you're going to see a lot of these guys over the next few years have this same issue where, and it's not even necessarily the player's fault. Sometimes it's just a bad situation, not the right situation, especially at a club where you have had a history of manager turnover. I got to tell you, it would give me a lot of concern and a lot of pause if I'm a Chelsea fan, because I think this is a recipe to go very, very sour over the next few seasons in terms of how that will all be managed. For West Ham, I think it's a great win. It's so bizarre. They celebrate the Europa Conference League trophy win here. They had the trophy, next to the field, and I thought that was amazing. And they were showing highlights before the game, and it's a big momentum win. James Ward-Prowse has a great debut. You really shut me up because I was very critical of the signing. I still don't think he's a very good midfielder, if I'm being totally honest, but does play some killer passes from time to time. Did, of course, contribute on set pieces, which he is known to do. Antonio gets a great classic. When I think of a Michael Antonio goal, that is the type of goal I think of. Him just using that great strength that he has, good speed, and I don't want to accuse him of too much of not being a clinical finisher, but he is the ultimate. Just get your foot over the ball and hope you get it on target, because I don't know how many keepers will be able to stop it if it is on target. He is just hit it for power, hit it low if you can, and just see what happens. And it does work for him sometimes. But he is definitely, I think he has a tremendous work rate. Like, this is a guy I don't think gets enough credit for how much work he puts off the ball. Great at aerial duels, winning challenges, things like that. Like, he does, I think, put in a lot of unseen work that doesn't always get the credit for. So shout out to Antonio there. Shout out to West Ham for a really nice victory at the start of the season, because Obviously, last year they were threatened with relegation. I don't see that for them this year, but they do have Europa League commitments. That's a big deal, and they'll be hoping, of course, to carry that momentum with them. They're making good signings in some areas at least, and we'll be looking to kind of reinforce the squad and have a good season, and I think they can. Let's kick over to Italy, where we had the season opener. The curtain was raised, and it was a great first weekend. I think not too crazy in terms of any shocks. You had Lazio falling to Lecce, which I think was a little bit of a surprise. Lecce are a team, I think a lot of people, myself included, that have looked at very suspiciously, thinking they could go down this year. But they pull off a little bit of a not quite giant killing, but definitely a surprise result on the first match day. But for the most part, a lot of the top clubs, except for all the two clubs primarily in Rome, in Roma and Lazio, managing to win. Roma drawing 2-2 with Salernitana. Crazy game that was. But yeah, you look around the league, it was a lot of comfortable wins for the top teams. Juventus gone, win 3-0 against Udinese. Atalanta had a really nice win. There's a lot of question marks about them this season because they, again, every year it feels like they lose players and they have to kind of repatch the squad. They get a nice win against Sassuolo. Inter, very, very comprehensive win over Monza. Fiorentina, really, really routed Genoa for a bit there. It felt like that game could have gotten really out of control. It ends up being 4-1. Napoli 3-1 over Frosinone. Milan also get a nice win on Monday against Bologna. Napoli especially very interesting because a lot of the talk is naturally going to be about them. Can they come back? Can they win the title? What is Victor Osimhen going to look like this year? He looked great. He looked really good in this first game, just back to his usual clinical in the area type of stuff. I thought it was an overall pretty impressive result for Napoli. Really, me and Dom were doing our season predictions, and I talked a lot about how I think any one of Milan, Inter, and Napoli could win the title. I think those three teams, for me personally, or I think Dom agreed, the three best teams in Italy. I think there's a very clear tier separation between everyone else in that league and those three teams, and I think that really bore out this weekend. I felt like they looked comfortable at times, and I felt like just have that extra gear, and they have Napoli especially have that start quality, Inter especially have that start quality. Milan don't quite have that, which, they have Rafael. I would not say he's quite Victor Osimhen, quite Lautaro Martinez. He's probably like 95% of them, though, if I'm being totally fair. And Dom's not here to debate me. Dom's not here to get upset when I say that. So, but Rafael is, of course, a great player, and we have seen him drag his team to a title. So, you got to give him credit where credit is due. But for me, I was just really impressed with a lot of those big teams and how they handled their business over the weekend, because it's very easy early in the season to have some slip-ups, and we know how crucial that can be, especially for anticipating, which it could be, a tight title race. We know it'll be a tight race in Europe, in Italy this year. Really all the top 7-8 teams. I think there's going to be a lot of jumbled numbers in there, and as it was last year too. So expect that, and every match week really matters in a league, I think, with as much parity as Italy has at the moment. I mentioned this a little bit already, but Roma Salernitana 2-2. Antonio Candreva, just my takeaway from the weekend is this man is 36 and still plays like he's, 27. Two fantastic goals. His second especially was just fantastic. So fluid. Still has that great first touch. I don't know how he does it, but there's an Italian player every 2 or 3 years that it feels like should have retired 7-8 years ago, like in your mind, but yet is still playing and still playing at a good high level. And Antonio Candreva is one of those players. I still remember Sampdoria a few years ago when he was there, thinking like, wow, I can't believe he's kind of hanging around and he's still playing pretty well. And here we are still. So shout out to Antonio Candreva, just showing that time is a myth, and it's just up to your own personal interpretation in how you let it affect you. Because two just great goals on the season opener there, and a crucial draw against Roma too. Roma obviously have their eyes set on finishing in the top 4 this year, finding their way to the Champions League. I think still a little embittered about that result in the Europa League final last season, but not a fantastic start to the season for them. They did, obviously make some last-minute signings before the season. Renato Sanchez, Leandro Paredes coming in to bolster that midfield. I don't think those are terrible signings. Again, though, they're playing the PSG midfield cast-off roulette, which I think is always a little bit of a risk. But Fernando Sanchez stays healthy. Paredes, I think, has fallen off a little bit in terms of his level. I was not impressed when I saw him for Juventus last season, but we'll see. Maybe you get a little rehab with Jose Mourinho, and you find your way. But I will say one good thing for Roma. I'm stepping on my third point here, so I might as well just tuck into this. Ending the goal drought was my other takeaway from Italy this weekend. Not only has it been a goal drought since June, when we last saw Serie A, of course, but Charles de Ketelaere finally gets a goal in Serie A. Wasn't able to at any point from Milan last year. Gets a goal in his debut for Atalanta. A marginal one. VAR had to intervene, and the goal line system had to intervene. It was almost a fantastic save, but his header did go over the line, gets his goal. A good moment for him. I think this is a guy that was clearly struggling for confidence. Clearly, you move to a league at a young age, you're still a little raw, and it just doesn't work out for you. He's clearly aware that it wasn't working out for him. And I think Atalanta is a great place to go and kind of rehab, especially if you're an attacking player. Atalanta is a great place to go and kind of find your footing. You're going to get chances there. You're going to get opportunities. You're going to have opportunities to score goals. I think it's a really good place to find himself. I think this kind of club, Atalanta, that system, make a little more sense for him. Maybe that should have been the stepping stone from Belgium to Italy rather than straight to Milan. I think that's always going to be a tough thing, especially with how much expectation was placed on him. So he already outperformed his output for Milan in the first game of the season. So it's only up from here for for Charles. Speaking of breaking goal droughts, Andrea Bellotti, one of my favorite Italian strikers of the last few years, did not score any goals last season, so hardly classified as a striker, I think, in a lot of ways. But did break that goal drought. Got two in this first game for Roma. Nearly led a comeback for them. Almost was close to a hat trick. He pulled up with a cramp, and it was one of those ones. Sometimes players go down and they kind of feign injury to try and get play to stop and maybe get some kind of advantage for their team, or they're just so winded that they sort of just stay down to catch their breath. He stayed down and was clearly suffering through cramp and was really struggling through that game. Maybe it's just the touch of goals. It just, he hadn't felt that feeling in so long and his body was in shock. I'm not sure what it was, but I did think it's a good thing for him. It's a good thing for Roma, who obviously, you're going to be missing Tammy Abraham for who knows how much, obviously with his knee injury. It doesn't seem like necessarily a striker's coming in. So I think a lot is going to rest on Bellotti finding his form again and being a good striker. And Dybala as well, working in partnership with him. I think that's going to be crucial. If Roma are going to go anywhere, Bellotti's going to have a say in that this season. So it was good to see him kind of get off the mark this year. Although it's obviously a disappointing result for Roma to draw at home on the first day of the season. But I do think in general, I was impressed with him. I think he got back. You never know too what confidence does to a player and how that can kind of change the whole momentum of the season. So maybe this is the exact kind of start he needs. Not the start Roma necessarily wanted, but if it leads ultimately to Bellotti being a double-digit goal scorer in Italy again, I think that's a really, really good sign for them, and I think could lead to some really positive results for them, although I wasn't super high on them coming into the season. I do think they have potential to be a good team, even a Champions League qualifying team. I think that's totally within the realm of possibility for Roma. That's all I have for the past weekend. I mean, it was a really fun weekend. England especially had some good results. You had obviously Manchester City going to Newcastle, getting a big result. The big news coming out of that game, Kevin De Bruyne injured his hamstring. He's going to get surgery on this. This is the same hamstring that was giving him problems at the end of last season that actually tore in the Champions League final when he had to get subbed off. That's a little concerning. Just because when you have hamstrings already worry me across all sports. It's a tough muscle that just always seems to linger and be really prone to re-aggravation. So already not an ideal type of injury to be dealing with. It's not great that he tore it in the Champions League final, had this time off, comes back, has a tear again, has to get surgery. That worries me personally. And Kevin De Bruyne's not young anymore either. I think we have this image that he is because he came back to the Premier League at an older age, but it felt like he was still young. He was new to, I think, a lot of people. it's a little worrying, and I think listen, Manchester City have won a title with Kevin De Bruyne missing time. Like it's not impossible. I do wonder what it does maybe for Erling Haaland. Like he and De Bruyne have a really really good link up, unsurprisingly, of course, but Haaland is a guy that is really dependent on service to score goals. Now he was still get it in Manchester City. Don't get me wrong, but I do think it's a little concerned. In a title race that could be tight. Maybe De Bruyne missing, 2-3 months could really mean something. He's also going to miss a big chunk, if not all of the Champions League group stages. You expect Manchester City to figure that out, but still, it's a little bit of a worry for Manchester City, to be missing him for such time. And I do wonder, again, with these types of injuries, what that recovery looks like, what he looks like when he's back. It's not an easy thing to just come back from this. And again, he's at an older age where it's not a guarantee that you come back to your full self when you're actually back from injury. So that was one really notable thing that I wanted to alert you to in case you missed that news. Outside of that, just looking ahead to the weekend, nothing huge going on in Italy. You've got Napoli Sassuolo. I think that's probably the biggest game of the weekend. You could also tune in for Juventus Bologna. I think that's a great one. Bologna obviously got off to a little bit of a disappointing start with Thiago Motta, but you got to trust Thiago. He's your favorite midfielder's favorite midfielder. You got to love the guy. Lazio will look to bounce back against Genoa, who got just, like I said, totally washed on opening day. In England, you've got some good ones. Obviously, I think Liverpool-Newcastle on Sunday is the one that everyone is kind of looking forward to. But you got Brighton versus West Ham. I think that's a fun little I hesitate to call that hipster, but I think there's some good intrigue there. You've got Chelsea Luton, battle of the relegation threatened teams at the bottom. That'll be a good one. I think Luton, they obviously had the weekend off because of a scheduling issue, and I'm looking forward to seeing Luton play again. Obviously they were outclassed on their first game, but obviously a great story. And I'm looking forward to seeing them. Can't wait for their first home game. That's going to be absolutely electric, and I'm really looking forward to watching that. Elsewhere, you got Everton Wolves. Could be a very, very important game in terms of relegation. As we get to the end of the season, you always look back on these fixtures and look at the results and think how different the world could be. Wolves, Mateus Nunes is attracting a lot of attention. Could potentially be their last game with him. Who knows? I'm sure they would love to get a positive result out of this one. Both these clubs in really, really bad spots. The season is looking very dark and grim for both of them. It's going to be a sort of white knuckle hang on to the railing for the rest of the year, because I'm not sure what's going to happen to either of these teams this season, because they don't have a ton of talent. It does not seem like reinforcements are coming from anywhere. So they're going to have to hold the line in a very real way. But that's it. We'll be back next week to wrap up those games. Any more storylines, any more news? We'll be close to having Champions League and Europa League groups, established. I don't think next week we'll have that back for you, but trust when they are that we will be breaking down those groups and talking about. I'm sure there's going to be at least one very, very good group of death in the Champions League for sure, just because of some of the teams that have re-entered the Champions League after some hiatus or have low coefficient points. A team like Newcastle, which of course are going to be a pot 4 team, they're going to be the team that makes it a lot of times a group of death. So plenty to look forward to in the coming weeks, and we will of course have it back for you. Dom will be back next week from his break. I will be back as well. I hope you all have a nice weekend. Enjoy the games, and I'll talk to you next time. See ya.